Good evening, everyone. Michael Devine here for another episode of Great Matters Radio. I'm your host, Michael Devine. Well, of course, I'm Michael Devine. My name is literally in the title of the show. That would be really weird that I get fired for my own show. So, yeah, I am Michael Devine. I am America's counselor. Why America's counselor? Well, unless you've turned on and watched the news at all, like, lately, crawled up from beneath a rock, America is in need of a counselor. Democrats, Republicans, I don't know. I feel like I'm a kid stuck in between the battle between two bad parents in a divorce. I don't like it. I'm going to take on the country as my client. Naturally, I can't do these things alone, so I bring on an assorted cast of characters with me. This week, I had to think really hard. Last week, we had my good friend Leon Cradle, the inspector, come in and talk about race. So I was like, well, we got to talk about, pick your poison. There's a million and one different things for us to talk about today, but we're going to talk about race a little bit, but I wanted to talk about a different angle of race. I always say you listen to the show because we're going to talk about things in the way that they need to have the conversations that our politicians are frankly afraid to have the conversations the media doesn't even want to cover because they're too busy, frankly, dividing us. So I wanted to talk about sports. I know it's kind of weird talking about sports because there literally has been absolutely no sports on. Well, there's been like cornhole championships and IndyCar started, and that's good. NASCAR, I don't even really watch it. But the sports that matter, football, baseball, basketball, hockey, soccer, none of them have been on. But sports, to me, I think we need to talk about sports because I think sports is like a microcosm of the human experience. It's a microcosm of our country. It's a microcosm of our families, our corporations. And if we're really going to talk about what is going on in this country, sometimes we got to take our brain away from looking at the TV screen and arguments on Facebook. We got to find a different way of looking at problems. It's what we do with our clients all the time. Create a little paradoxical way of thinking, get them people to think outside of their own experience to look at a problem in a new way again. And that's what we're going to do. So without further ado, I want to bring on good friend, Dr. Justin Anderson, sports psychologist, but premier sports psychology, plus just a good friend of mine from the University of North Texas. Justin, how you doing, sir?
Mikey D, great to see you. Great to visit with you. Thanks for having me on, man.
Yeah, I wish it was different circumstances. I wish we were talking about like sports psychology, like why is Carson Wentz going to win the Super Bowl this year? What is the psychological makeup of? I wish I could talk about, the Vikes and just why they can never quite get over the hump, but we can't talk about it that way. We have other more important things to talk about, don't we?
More important, much more important.
So, dude, you live in Minnesota. You're from Minneapolis, St. Paul area. I imagine just everything going on to you. It has to be more personal to you. It should be personal to all of us, but you guys were kind of at the epicenter of a lot of it. I imagine it has to hit you a little bit differently.
It really has. Sitting in this city over the last 15 days or so, it's really been something that I've never experienced, and I'm 44 years old. I've never seen a city sort of turn over and really reflect, and sort of, as your intro discussed, in need of a counselor.
Yeah.
There's just so much going on, and I think for a lot of the right reasons. But we are really at the epicenter of some real significant change. And on one hand, I'm really, really proud of Minneapolis for stepping in and making some of that change and voicing some of that change. And then on the other hand, really feeling a lot of guilt and a lot of shame that this was the place where some really horrific events occurred with the murder of George Floyd. So, we're sitting in the middle of something that there is a lot of emotion, a lot of anger. But it's really been fascinating from my standpoint to work with a lot of the leaders of a lot of the sport professions and our businesses and had a frontline perspective of some of the things that they're trying to do to initiate some change. So it's been both a curse, but also a blessing.
And that's why I was really excited to have you on the air, is because, if you really think about it for a second. If we think back over the last, let's say, 50, 60 years, and we think about the most, poignant moments with civil rights or race. I mean, I think like Jackie Robinson, playing playing baseball, being the first black, baseball player, I think just, Jim Brown, and, him pretty much seemed like almost leaving football at the pinnacle of his career just for a lot of what his beliefs were. Right. I think the Colin Kaepernick, the kneeling movement, that just goes without saying. I remember a couple years back with Richie Incognito, which kind of really almost blew the door open, really a lot on bullying, racism, anti-gay. I just think sports always seems to be like this lightning rod for race relations. It's like the first place you hear it, or maybe not the first place you hear it, but the place where it really enters the consciousness of a lot of Americans that maybe would never think about race all that much. From your experience as a sports psychologist, you've worked with college teams, NFL teams, Major League Baseball teams, hockey teams, basketball. You've seen it across the board. Why sports? What is it about sports that tends to have this effect on people in this country?
Well, I think the first thing, sport is really a social phenomenon. We are all so into sport. It's become a one of the go-to entertainments of America, and I think that's for a lot of reasons. One, it's live, and you get to see people really performing, trying to do their best in a fishbowl. Really out there in front of large crowds and large groups, trying to perform at their best. But so it's this social icon for so many different people, and you've got a lot of different races that absolutely love sport, and so sport is at the forefront of a lot of different cultures within our larger melting pot of a culture, and so we get a lot of groups coming together to enjoy this entertainment, and to cheer on our teams and our organizations. So we see sport really at the forefront of a lot of cultural shifts and a lot of cultural changes. And that really started back with Jordan. Michael Jordan was one of the first sort of cultural icons that wasn't just a great player. He changed fashion. He changed what it meant to be an athlete, and the coolness of that. And I remember growing up in that era and needing those shoes or wanting to wear the Nike shorts in a certain way. And that was really a shift for our culture. And it hasn't really changed since then. I think we look up, you mentioned a Carson Wentz or a Jordan or a LeBron or Kobe or, you name your athlete. But a lot of those folks are sort of leading a lot of communities and fashion, music, in a lot of different areas about how to behave and how to interact. So sport has been one of those things that has been in America, at least for the last 50 years or so, that has been sort of the front and center of our entertainment industry. And then in the last 20 years, really kind of the head of a lot of cultural and fashion and arts components too for America. So it really is a place where a lot of people go to watch and to see where these things emerge.
And this is like, I guess one of my first questions I would love just to get your experience and just what your observations are of this, because even going back to Jackie Robinson, you hear about some of the stories and what he had to go through. I remember reading his biography, just the things that the people said, the things that were said in the locker room, but you almost heard, it almost seemed like it was the fans and the people almost in the periphery that seemed to be the worst part about it. And you don't really hear much. It's weird. You don't hear much about overt racism in sports, but yet you have so many people from different parts of the world, all in a very tight kind of, is race and racism any better or worse in the microcosm of a sports team? And as a player, as a sports psychologist, what does it really look like behind those doors in a locker room?
Well, I think in some ways, being a white male, I may not see all of it. So I just want to put that out there as there are blind spots, in particular what people may or may not share with me. But I would say no, that racism is there as well as in other places. And from the athletes that I have spoken with and the coaches that I've spoken with over the last 15 days, that is pretty evident. That it's there as it is in every kind of corner of our existence here, at least in this country. I think the one thing, though, that we tend to see in sport is there becomes this ability to get along and to interact and to work together across races, across cultures. And I think that sport is at the forefront in how to do that and to do that successfully. So I don't want to minimize that there isn't racism involved in organizations. And I think there would be a lot of sort of systemic taking a look at how many owners are of black or color versus the players, and that discrepancy right there, I think is probably one that I've heard emerge quite a bit over the last 15 days. But when we talk about teams in and of themselves, I think we do see a lot of groups coming together and playing very well together. And I think there's a number of different reasons for that. I mean, I think as you and I were talking just a little bit before this, I think one of the first things is whenever you're around multiple cultures or people that are different than you, I mean, I think one of the biggest issues that we have with America right now is that we don't spend a lot of time outside of our small unit or our culture. And the opportunity to interact with others from other cultures or other races oftentimes creates more empathy for us. We start to recognize that we have a lot more similarities than we have differences. And the differences are built up by media and by other things that can be that, or just preconceived notions passed on from generations to generations about the differences between our groups. But I think if you sit day in and day out and interact with people, you recognize they want a lot of the similar things that we want. Security, success. They want to do the right thing. I mean, humans are not that far off from one another in terms of what we want. If we really break it down psychologically too, humans tend to be pretty good when we get our needs met and our psychological needs met. And we all can be really assholes, or what Jung talked about, our shadow side, if we're not getting those psychological needs met. So we're all kind of born okay. And if we get valued and we feel valued and we get some of the energy and respect that we all kind of crave and deserve, then we tend to thrive. We tend to be really great people in our communities. If we don't get that, then we tend to act out, and we tend to, and you got to look no further than I have 2 little kids, and when I am down at their level, listening to them, paying attention to them, and valuing what they have to say, oh, they're little angels. But if I'm busy or I'm on my phone or I'm making dinner or I'm trying to do something else and I'm continually missing what they're trying to say or what they're communicating to me, they act out. And now I start to see their shadow side, and they're going to make me pay attention to them one way or the other. And so I think if we can lead with that respect and that understanding and trying to understand one another, we'll be in a better place.
And I think like what you just said, I mean, it is such a huge fundamental human thing of like, I want to know that I'm being heard, and I want to know that I matter. And it has to come externally. It's an attachment theory thing. We need that. That's the one thing humans are awful at, is assessing who we are, our worth, our value in a vacuum of anything else. And so if you live in an environment or a society where it's being told you don't matter, I don't care about your voice, or the worst is like being lied to, saying it does matter, but then the actions don't match it. What happens when systemically, it doesn't even matter about race, it's just systemically, when people aren't being heard, they don't think they matter, these are the things that start happening. What's interesting on a sports team, though, whereas right now we're seeing an explosion of the emotion where it's overflowing out there for everyone to see, everyone is spouting off their opinion. In sports teams, though, we see the opposite. I think back to some big incidents that would always happen. It'd always be like this: we're going to keep this in-house. We're going to keep this in-house. We're going to talk about this in-house. Almost like not allowing the media to twist people's words. Social media will even almost seems like a blackout. Is that by design, because that's just what tends to work better? And then what happens after that? Because I know those are conversations you're privy to. What happens after the coach comes out and goes, we're going to handle this with the team?
Yeah, so I think the one thing that sports teams, particularly at the pro and high-level college levels, they're very good at managing the media, and they're very good at recognizing what they want to put out and what they want to keep in. And I think other organizations don't have the constant media scrutiny that professional sports do, where everything is analyzed to the nth degree, much like politics. But sports has a lot of practice in that regard, and so they really try to manage their message in a way that is that connects and tries to relay what they're really trying to communicate. So they spend a lot of time. They have a lot of people on staff to try to help with that message, to make sure that message is great. But two, I think they also recognize that they need to walk the walk, because if they don't walk the walk, that gets exposed pretty quickly in sport. And because there's just so much constant media pressure and media attention. And then with everybody within the staff and within the players all having their own platform and all having their own voice with social media and whatever else, that you can't today stray off of what your plan is and get away with it like I think you could probably a couple decades ago. Today, for better or worse, social media has kept us, I think, probably a lot more authentic, because we're having to walk the walk. And if somebody blatantly says one thing and then shifts gears, that is going to get called out and then constant scrutiny for that. So I think pro teams in many ways have gotten a lot of reps at that. And so they're pretty good at determining what goes into those conversations and what doesn't. And I can tell you that from my experience with the teams that I've been working with, they're doing a nice combination of both. They're having a lot of internal conversations about what do we need to do, how do we need to move and move the needle is kind of the term that a lot of people are talking about, is how do we advance and make some changes systemically within our organization. But then also, how do we communicate that, use the platform that we have in our society to communicate some of the good that we're trying to change here, both internally, but also within our communities. And so they're really trying to find that balance. But I know that there's a lot of fear, a lot of concern, a lot of worry about how to do that and trying to get the right message out at the right time in the right way. And I think there's a lot of people really struggling with how to do that and how to do that well.
And that's where it's like, I look at how many times has there been some really bad things that happen on the team, and then that's the team that figures it out. And then they always talk about, well, we use that as our we gelled together as a result of it, and we won the Super Bowl as a result, or we went on our 8-game skid and we won the next, how, because I hear that and I'm going, okay, right now we're in an environment out of here, even when you say the right thing, people are going to point, like, it doesn't even matter what you say or do anymore. What is it that we can learn by, what is it that teams are doing that when they have an event I mean, it's like a bomb that can go off in a locker room. What is it that they do that gets everybody to, I don't know if coalesce around a message, I don't know if it's like an empathy thing, but what gets people to where they can use something awful and then use it to work together to win a championship, and where they have to work together? And how can we apply that to where we're at right now? Because that to me is that, God, if we can capture that lightning in a bottle and put it out over here, all right, we have some change we can make. Help me understand that.
That's a really great observation, Mikey. One of the things that I tend to say about sport is sport doesn't really matter about what race you are when you're out on the court or on the field. What matters is whether or not you can do the job. And I think one thing that pulls teams together is a common goal or a common vision. And, with sport, we all know what that is. It's to win a championship. And so we know we have that leverage because everybody who's there really does. They've worked their tails off to get to that, and they want to win that championship because they know that, one, it benefits them, but two, it also benefits the team. And so we have a common goal where I don't see that right now in our society, particularly in America right now. I think we're very divided in sort of directions we want to take this country. But sport, that's not the case. We have a common goal. Second thing I would say is that we have common rules on how to go get that goal. So I think the other aspect that, the empathy, then having the common goal, and then I would say we have common rules that everybody agrees to. And it doesn't matter what race you are or how long you've been in the league or not. Those things do tend to apply to you. Now, there might be some slight variations for superstars versus non-superstars, but even then, it's very minimal, and certainly not what we're hearing in terms of some of the class or race issues or differences that we're seeing in our country right now. So we have a common set of rules and we have a common vision, and I think those things can get us to a positive place. I think the one downside that I would say is that a lot of times we see that if there's not mutual trust and respect, so if I don't trust the person or respect the person across from me, then we're going to have destructive conflict. Conflict in and of itself is not a bad thing, but what we call destructive conflict is. And we get destructive conflict only when we don't have mutual trust or respect within the two parties that are in conflict. And in sports world, one of the things that we find is that if you've made the team, you typically have a role and you have a value. So there are people that already respect you because you made the cut. And a lot of people also know how difficult it is to make that cut. So if you're there, it's because somebody believed that you can help the team. And so there's automatically a little bit of benefit of the doubt given by other teammates, because they say, okay, if this person made the cut, there's something about them that there's a lot of people looking at and analyzing these persons or this person's stats and performances. There must be a reason why they're here on this field and or court. And so there's a mutual trust and respect and a benefit of a doubt that is given by players to other players, regardless of race, and/or coaches and staff of people, regardless of race, because they think that they can help. Now, that is not the benefit of the doubt that we give in our society. And I think it's also one of the reasons why when we have conflict, we don't have the mutual trust and respect to keep us together. We have more divisiveness, no trust, no respect, and that's destructive conflict, which can bring us down. And those are the key differences that I've seen between what America is facing right now and what we see within teams.
I'm not gonna lie, when you put all that together, it's like that makes all the sense in the world. But then it's like, God, we're fucked, right? Because if you think about it, right, when you have a sports team, you're right. It's like you can always have the ability. It's just like I do if it's a family or a couple or if it's a business. Listen, what is our goal here? What are we trying to do? To make the business grow, to keep the family together, to stay married. And it's like, how is this going to help you get this? Like, you can do whatever the hell it is you want, but how is this going to help us accomplish this common goal? And when there is that common goal, you always have the ability to go, listen, hey, you can do whatever you want. Hey, no one would doubt that you're probably frustrated, but do we have an agreed upon goal? And is this going to help? And then you always have that, all right, gang, you may not like each other, but we're here to do A, we're here to do B, and we can all agree to that. So what are we going to do? It's our choice. And no one is knowingly, as a professional especially, is going to do something that goes complete opposite. When that happens, they get booted off a team, right? And so you look at real life, it's like, number one, we don't have that. If you were to go and talk to anybody in the street, and I think where you tend to have your finger on the pulse of what's happening in organizations and sports teams as individuals, that's my jam. And nobody feels as though there's a common goal. If anything, many people feel as though the common goal is that you're trying to actually keep me down. Sometimes it's not even about the outside forces. It's I'm being like, if you think differently than me, you're actually the reason why I don't have what I should have. And by you continuing to do what you're doing, you're actually taking food out of my family's mouth. Now you're my enemy, and now I've dehumanized you. And then it gets reinforced by the tactics of, I mean, let's face it, politicians and the media would not get away with what they get away with if they didn't socially engineer us to like basically only think about me. Only think about how's this going to affect me. And if that dares affects me, I don't give a shit if it might cause you to get a virus. You cannot take that away from me. And you start seeing quickly why in a sports team, you see what they have, common goal, mutual trust and respect for one another, because you have to. You may not like each other, but we have to be professionals because we have to we have to get this goal accomplished. But then 3, value. You're on this team, you have value. My ego might sometimes say that, hey, maybe I'm a little bit higher up. I make a little bit more. I am the quarterback. I am the running back. But outside of those nuances of that, I know I'm important. You know I'm important. I may just argue that I think you think I need to be more important. We don't have that in the real life, do we? Does anyone feel as though that everyone thinks they're important? If anyone, most people feel stepped on. And we start talking about the socioeconomics of race, and people have been just put down and dehumanized and just literally, I mean, just systematically kept in a certain spot. Why in the fuck would they feel like anyone cares? And then what are we seeing? And that's when I found out when I asked my buddy about what is the anger about? Help me understand. And it's like, how would you feel if like you're just not being heard? Eventually you get to the point where going, fuck it. I'm going to make my voice heard regardless of what it's going to do. And it's just amazing how you see that the stark differences between the two and why one works, why the other one doesn't. And it's depressing a little bit that we've allowed that to happen. But you brought up a great point off the air and even in the beginning. Where's our social responsibility to go, well, yeah, okay, that's what the score is. That's what's missing. Which one of these is not like the other? So, okay, how do we create that?
You know, I don't know. I certainly don't have the answers for all of that, but I do 100% agree with your point around how we have all been somewhat programmed to be consumers. You know, I kind of go back to, I think some of the reasons why we are so feeling entitled right now is because everything we have with our phones and our devices, lead me to say, oh, you've earned this. You deserve the new and improved. You've done X, Y, and Z, and now you should be rewarded. Or, I mean, and really, when you think about the science behind our smartphones, and I mean, there's a lot of, I hate to say it because it's on my profession, but there's a lot of psychologists working for those firms right now, trying to develop ways to make it stickier, make it more addictive.
Yep.
So that people will continue to go back, and then they funnel your focus or attention to the things that they want it funneled on.
Yeah.
And I think ultimately what we've done as a society in our consumerism age, if this is what it's going to be called as we look back at it in history, we have, you know, a number of different eras from the golden ages to the industrial revolution to perhaps now the consumerism age. But all that we're seeing with this is this directing and pulling our attention to, they have control over what we attend to. And we know from a sports psychology or performance standpoint, but also a mental health and wellness standpoint, whatever we attend to ultimately will have an effect on our thoughts and our emotions.
Yep.
And then ultimately our emotions drive our behaviors. So a lot of the studies, when we look at social media and indoor other things, people find big significant dips in their mood and or their thoughts after they get on social media.
Yep.
So you go in feeling pretty good. You start to look at it for a while and you're like, damn, I'm comparing myself to whatever, seeing these other people with their great cars and the 600 horsepower engines and all that kind of stuff. And all of a sudden you start to say, well, shoot, I haven't been working my ass off and I haven't gotten that. And I deserve that. Why didn't I get this? Or why didn't I get that? But we're constantly feeling in this deficit space. Mm-hmm. And when we're in a deficit space, we're looking for things to fill us up. And when we don't get filled up, we react with anger or frustration or whatever else. Or we consume more. Yep. And we hope that will fill us. And to your point, I think what we've lost is this ability to, one, have an intrinsic understanding of where we put our attention and choosing why we attend to what. But we as a society have lost that skill to put our focus or choose what we focus on. And we'll listen to the strongest talking head. And so now it's like, oh, I'll listen to that person because what else am I doing? I'm not doing. Oh, I'll listen to that person on whatever news. And I'll start to slide into that thinking, or it will confirm some of the biases that I have that I grew up with, and it's like, yeah,
Yep, there it
this
is.
guy, this
Yeah.
gal, this is how it's done. And I believe that anything other than that is wrong. Instead of saying, well, wait a minute, let me think about this. Let me go pros and cons of this. How does this help me? How does this hurt me? We don't do that anymore. We let somebody else teach us what that is. And I think that's where we got to get back to. I mean, ultimately, I'm a psychologist. I'm a little biased myself. But I think if we learn a little bit more about how the human mind works and how we process information and then what we do with that, I think we all would be a lot healthier and a lot happier. And I think we would treat each other better with a little more respect, which we all sorely need, because I think clearly some of the reasons why we're seeing what we're seeing is due to a lot of those factors that just are not occurring.
Oh yeah, I was talking to a good buddy of ours online, Jeff Temple. He's a researcher, was it A&M Commerce, I want to say, and he was asked, well, what do you think we should do? I go, well, number one, psychology, we got to stand up and go, all right, you know what? We've chased a lot of money. I think every single one of us in one way, shape, or form was recruited by somebody, whether it be a military, an intelligence agency, corporations, human factors, where what can we do to take people who are studying the human mind to help the mind? And how can we take that understanding to get you guys to buy shit more, to pay attention to something differently? And we haven't stood up and said, no, like, yeah, like we're all in debt, and yeah, you want to chase money, but we're fucking people up. I mean, hell, Sean Parker, the dude that helped start up Facebook, literally said in an interview going, we literally have hijacked the dopamine reward system. We knew what we were doing. Cheryl Cook of Facebook, the COO, and what's his name before he passed away, the Microsoft, not after Steve Jobs. They were all saying the same thing. Not one news thing picked it up going, so like, wow, so let me get this straight. You basically just did what the tobacco companies did and just kind of drop it. Yeah, we may have fucked your kids up. My bad. I mean, literally, I mean, like, that's half the problem, is that you're right. We've been so trained to not have any empathy for other people. And I've always wondered if that's also why maybe you do see some other differences in sports, because, I mean, gosh, you'll talk with people. And I think this is, I got into a discussion about what white privilege was. And I go, listen, maybe I'm going to have an academic definition of it, because we took like an entire year of multicultural stuff. I go, white privilege really is a misnomer how it's titled. It's not about a privilege like, oh, feel guilty. It's simply about, it's pointing attention to the things from your experience, to where if you never ever experienced that, you would never ever know to ever think about that. And so, like, as a white person, I never ever thought about not getting a job because of my color. I never ever thought about if I got pulled over, it was because of my color. And that's all that the whole white privilege thing is that it's just the idea of, don't define some of the things that we're saying and doing from your perspective of it's not a big deal, because it was never a big deal to you. It just never dawned on you that this wasn't an experience that a lot of other people are having. And because we don't communicate and talk with anybody anymore, we don't really understand other people's experiences. It's like Plato's allegory of the cave. Sometimes I feel like I'm literally have crawled out of the cave, and I'm telling the people still chained in the inside of the cave going, no, there's a lot more than shadows and fire on the wall. And they're yelling at me, telling me I'm wrong and I have fake reality. And it's like, I'm literally out here seeing blue sky. That's how conditioned we are. And you look at sports teams, though, once again, that common goal, that common messaging, you have to work together, the value, but also that people are forced to get out of their own ethnocentricity. How many times are you going to see an inner city kid from like New York interacting for 4 years with a guy from like a Samoan guy from Hawaii, or a white person from like, a wealthy area of California interacting with a country kid from Nebraska that grew up on the farm his whole life? I imagine and think about it, like 4 years of college, how many people you're introduced to, how many people go to college away from their own place they grew up, how many pros are playing in 4, 5 cities, with all those different, I mean, how much does that play into that humanizing being forced, because you have to understand other people's cultures?
I think that's huge. I mean, I really do. I think it's a big thing. And, with a lot of the teams that I'm currently working with, we have had really powerful conversations, and we've got a very diverse group of people, and we're facilitating it in a way that's pretty positive. But it's been awesome to hear just the experiences of so many different people from so many different cultures and races on their perspectives on race and on systemic racism and their experiences about what they did or did not have to experience. And I think that's just a great exercise for anyone to step back and say, well, wait a minute, who are you as an individual and what shapes your world? When we think about your biases and how you come into our relationship, what were some of the factors, the key factors that made up who you are today, made up your values, made up how your perceptions of how humans behave? Because that really will impact how you and I interact.
Yeah.
We don't do that. We haven't had those conversations. Heck, many couples, partners that we have worked with aren't having those kinds of conversations.
If anything, it's almost reinforced to do the opposite if you really watch the news.
Absolutely.
You just don't get it. It's like, that's not important. It's like, how the fuck is that not important?
It's everything. And I think if I really get through, and what I loved about your intro, America's Counselor, I've had this thought in this conversation with a number of the people that I work with, we got to go through counseling. Mm-hmm. And ultimately what we got to do is we got to go through a period. So counseling takes this, and you know this very well. But first step is we got to allow people to voice and vent the emotions that they're feeling. You've got to process that. Got to make some sense of that. Where is that coming from? Why is it important? Why is it bubbling up now? What triggered it? What caused it? What trauma created it? And if we understand that, and then only until we understand that, can we then move to the next step, which begins to say, so after the venting and the processing component, then we've got to start to say, like, okay, how does this help me and how does this hurt me? Because our adversity to a lot of adversity can help us see the light. There was a great musician that said, without the darkness, where's the light? And, if with that darkness, we can really begin to hone in on what's most important. And I hope more than anything, the multiple crises that we're sitting in the middle of. One, we have a global pandemic. Two, we have an incredible social justice crisis that's hitting this country, long overdue, likely. And then three, we have a pretty significant economic hit that we're sitting in the middle of. I mean, rivaling perhaps the Great Depression.
Yeah.
So we're sitting in the middle of a trifecta of storms of multiple crises that go on. And the one thing that I hope that, at least if we look back in history at how humans have performed, with that crisis, oftentimes we get better, more evolved thinking. And we start to say, well, wait a minute. That last period of time was not working for us anymore. We've got to destruct that and recreate something new. And that's going to be very, very difficult. I'm curious to see what emerges here as we come out of this, out of these multiple crises, because I don't know if we're positioned with this inability to not communicate, to be able to see anything outside of our. And so in some ways, the fear that I have is that it's going to get worse before it gets better.
Yeah. Well, and that's where I look at, that's where leadership comes in. Because I think we've done a really good job of really laying out what's missing in real life, that common goal, the agreed upon common goal, the equality, the mutual trust and respect, right? And those are all great things where those are policies. Those are almost things where you can almost create some policy, right? I mean, some of it less with the mutual trust and respect, but to me, it comes down to leadership. With every one of these sports teams, that we could probably go through through probably some of the most turbulent times in society and talk about what coaches talk to their team about, how the staff kept people together versus the staffs where it got shredded and torn apart. It's like, is that what we're missing? Is that transformative leader? Not like in the essence of a Kennedy, but somebody who has the ability to stand up like a coach in a room full of, I mean, I'm sure you've seen and heard the stories of people fighting, grown men just getting after each other, it blowing up, and that there's a coach, there's somebody in there that has the ability to say something in a way that maybe people didn't hear it before, that made them kind of maybe refocus on what they need to. Like, what are those factors that we need to be looking for if we need that transformative figure? Like, who have been some of your, I know you can't give away anything, but like, who are some like favorite things or maybe characteristics, maybe less people that you've heard in a locker room that went, that's what we need on our national level?
The one thing that I'll say on that is, we just got out of watching with the pandemic. The only sports thing that was on for a while was Michael Jordan's Last Dance.
I'm on number 8 right now.
Oh, fantastic! Well, then you're in the middle of recognizing how Phil Jackson managed multiple personalities and how he treated each one with respect.
Yeah,
each one with
differently
a way
too.
Very differently.
Yeah, Rodman was treated differently than Pippen. Pippen was treated differently than Jordan. Jordan was treated. It was interesting.
It really was. And he did a very nice job of taking from some very strong personalities, but also saying, look, we're listening, we're hearing you, and bring back and helping them redirect their attention back to the goal, back to what's the vision here. And I think great leaders do a wonderful, wonderful job. And I would say that the underlying factor that I would say great leaders have is emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
It's the ability to recognize their own biases and their own triggers and their own emotions and the things that drive them or light them up. But then it's that ability to see that in others and recognize that the way I treat you has got to be different than the way I treat somebody else.
Yeah.
Then I need to understand what lights you up, what triggers you, so that I can manage and shift how I work with you. And leadership in the past was not how it was done. It was, you get on board to my bus. And if you're not aligned with the leader's vision, values, needs, and goals, then you're off.
Yeah.
And we'll just kick you off. The way we're shifting and what we recognize, that's great for military. It's not really great for leading large societies that aren't dictated and have to be told what to do for immediate time. When we're trying to build intrinsic motivation or understand and get you to want to work because you want to work, not because I'm holding something up against you or threatening you to do that, then we have to understand what makes you tick. And I really got to understand what drives you and what motivates you. And if I get that, I understand that, then I can speak to that. If I can speak to that, boom, things light up.
Think about that mutual trust and respect. I mean, think about when I always say the problem with America is minding the gap. I don't know if you've been to London at all, but everything is mind the gap, right? Pay attention to the gap because you might get your foot cut off or hit by a train, right? But where the media, where social media, where everyone gets you, politicians, is the gap of information. You don't know what's in there. It's like a box where all you've been allowed to do is shake it. You don't know much about it, but you have to take someone else's word for what's in there. What they try to do is prime you for what you think might be in there, why something might have happened. And that was nowhere on The Last Dance when they were talking about it was the fight between was it Purdue or Steve Kerr, where he was saying how he challenged Mike. He was not going to buckle down at all. He was not going to give in. And multiple times, I showed him who I was about, and he knew he couldn't push me around. It made him respect me because he wanted that, and he knew why I was doing what I was doing, but it made me angry at first. Or you hear all these stories of MJ would do this, MJ would do that, he would do this, but then it was, it pissed us off, but we understood what his intentions were. It wasn't that he was an asshole. It wasn't that he didn't like us. It wasn't that he thought he was the ego. I mean, he knew he was Michael Jordan, but it was because this is what all Michael knew of how to win. And he was teaching us what basically passing on to us. And it was rough. It's not for everybody, but that's what it takes to win. And that's why he was doing it. And we didn't take it personal, although we had many blow ups. That's what is missing. That's what is missing.
It really is.
Why are you doing that?
Perfect example of mutual trust and respect. Yeah. Because I think a lot of players, and if you've read anything on the outside of that show, there's a number of players that said, yeah, MJ was an asshole. Yeah. And he was somebody that demanded and was not a great teammate to play with. But a lot of people really respected him because of all the hard work. I mean, he never asked anybody to do something that he wasn't going to do
himself. That's right.
And he would challenge people, but I think those that got to know him knew that he was challenging you because he saw that there was more in you, and that's what he wanted from you. He wanted to make sure if you could take his wrath there, then you could take a game 6 against a Karl Malone or whoever else.
Yeah.
And that's what Jordan was trying to prepare people for, which is a lot of our older school coaches That's their thinking around it. And there is value to that. However, in the last probably 5 to 10 years, we've seen a lot of athletes try to maintain or do that similar style of leadership. And because they haven't won, they get blown out of the water saying, what a cancer, what a negative person on the team.
Yeah.
And we got to get rid of him. And they don't belong in our team. They're a culture suck. And so it's fascinating. The exact same personality with winning 6 championships, great. We're all, as a society, love them, and that's great. Same style, same personality, and they don't win a championship, and we call that person an absolute loser, and what a horrible leadership style they have. So it's funny how we misinterpret very similar styles, and how we give one all the credit in the world, we revere them, and the other one who is the exact. I mean, if we put them back to back, and I were just to give you quotes of somebody who is considered an a-hole versus Michael Jordan, you might have a very difficult time understanding which athlete's which.
The only difference is what the results are. You always talk about like a Team Penske, like can't even wear face, like you can't have like any facial hair. I mean, I'm high and tight, but guess what? Fuckers win championships in Indies, right? The New England Patriots, same exact deal. If you win, that it's kind of like we were talking about the common goal. It's not only the common goal, it's if the common goal and what we're doing is helping us win those, then I guess it works. But if you've never showed me that it works, you might say it's going to get us there, but I haven't seen it. Like Chip Kelly is a great example of, hey, if you do this, it's going to get you there. The second they realized it wasn't, what happened? Fell out, like epically fell out of teams, right? That emotional intelligence. So that's what I think we really need. I mean, if anything, all we have right now is people minding the gap with, well, they might have been an Antifa.
Yeah, that's it. That's all we got.
Yeah, that's all we got. And then now what have you filled the gap in automatically? They might be that. We're not even allowing ourselves to give benefit of the doubt. Everything is more about the worst case scenario because that's what gets people riled up. So I think what you're saying is really who we need for president is Phil Jackson.
Either that or Mike Devine.
That's what I'm hearing. I am hearing Phil Jackson. I think Phil Jackson should be president. I mean, how many times has this guy built things up, kept it together? No matter how big the egos are, 2 different teams, 2 different eras, 2 different styles of play. His philosophy apparently kind of works. Common goal, mutual trust and respect.
Common goal, mutual trust, respect, feeling value,
empathy. Feeling valued, emotional intelligence, respecting people's individuality, knowing how to get people on board with the same message, and knowing how to get people to walk back from the edge, which is what we need right now. I mean, think about that last year. I mean, you got Phil Jackson, who was like, fuck this, I'm not going to come back. You had, Rodman, who they had to go find him somewhere in Vegas, right? You had Pippen, who basically signed an awful contract that was his own fault and was going, I ain't going to come back at all. And yet somehow, for one more year, that last dance, we have a common goal. Let's finish what we started. Knew who to talk to and how they talked to him. Even himself. He brought himself back from it. And knowingly how bad it was with Jerry Krause, I mean, just that's what we need. That is what's going on in this country. You need someone to be able to come in there and do all those things. And I think that's our solution. I mean, it's simple, but it's so daunting at the same time. And I think the one thing that we need to come up with, and we're not going to come up with it on this show, but we got to have a common goal again. An agreed upon common goal for humanity, not just the United States and Americans. We need that because we need something unified, because right now it's being more that other group that you disagree with is actually getting in the way of what you want, and therefore they're the enemy and they're not humans, and you don't have to have the same rules. You can justify anything you want to them.
I think it's going to be really interesting to see what that common goal could be right now. I mean, it almost will take some sort of extraterrestrial presence to pull us together as a society. In my opinion, I feel like we can claim any kind of global issue, and we still will have very, very strong contrasting opinions, partly because of different interests underneath those interests. And so the question is what will unify us? What possibly could unify us right now? And I mean, I think that's what we have to fight. I think you're right. I mean, I think we got
Phil
to
Jackson or aliens. That's literally our conclusion. Two very intelligent guys that are in a business of helping people, moving people along, systems. And the two that we come up with is Phil Jackson being president or fucking aliens. And maybe the alien has to be an amazing basketball player that Phil Jackson gets to coach. Like Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, they brought world peace by music. Maybe it's like world peace by basketball. A jump shot is a beautiful thing, man.
You've got to figure it out. You've got it.
I think I got it. We figured it out. Air high five.
Right there.
God,
right
we got
there.
it figured out. So on that note, we almost have to end there. I mean, you cannot top a show when you have Phil Jackson being president and aliens as our solution, and be dead serious. And we're dead serious too. Not even like, oh, that'd be funny. It's like, nah, for real. Like Phil Jackson or Bibble. Bibble for shizzle. Like, it's all we got. Now before we bust out of here, man, I want to give you a chance to plug Premier Sports Psych. Tell them a little bit about yourself, where they can find you. Yeah, man.
Yeah, well, you can find us at premiersportpsychology.com, not sports, premiersportpsychology.com. And then we do have some really cool online training right now for those in the COVID thing and having athletes, high school or collegiate athletes that really want to advance their mental game. This is the same tools and the same things that we do with our professional athletes and our Division I collegiate athletes. And that's Premier Mindset. And that's, if you go to our premiersportpsychology.com website, you can find the Premier Mindset. And that's some really cool, top of the line, high level training that you all can do. Either you can order an organizational license for your team and run all your players through it, or you can do one individually for you. And we recommend either or, but some of the concepts that we're talking about here, where we're saying, can we learn how to think differently and perform differently? I mean, it all starts with the foundation, which we call is the human mind, and understanding how the mind works and where we put our attention not only will help you out on the field, but will help you in relationships and will help you in the boardroom, will help you anywhere you want to be, because at the end of the day, every behavior we do is a performance. And if we can get really good about being intentional about how we want to be, I promise you, if we get our minds right, the body and the behaviors will follow.
Yeah. Dude, I love that, man. I love all the shit. I mean, we've talked over the years just about crazy ideas, and it's just amazing how you've been able to take all these things, put them into a practice, and help people. I mean, that's the thing, man. I mean, dude, you're killing it out there. I mean, I wish I could sit there and talk about like how much of a badass you are and what you're doing. But hey, as clinicians, we got to be careful with our confidentiality. But leave me on this one, all right? If like you were ever to get like a gig with like, oh, I don't know, the New York Mets or the Eagles. I mean, like, I'm just saying, like, maybe you can tell me something. That way I could pass on some information. Like, don't throw at people's shoes. Like, I don't know. Like, maybe we can work out some code that's HIPAA compliant that will be off the air to where I can at least pass on some nuggets of knowledge. I mean, it's not every day you have a friend who gets to work with pro teams. I mean, it's kind of cool.
Yeah, no, and I don't work with those pro teams, so we won't be sharing any of that stuff.
Awesome, so it would be like Barson Bentz, we could like totally de-identify it.
Nobody would get that. We'd be all set.
Nobody would get that. But no, you're doing some awesome work, man. I mean, literally, I'm just really excited that you could take the time out, come on the air. And I think this people kind of see why psychology, and especially like counseling psych, and a lot of our ways that it can be applied to anywhere. It can be applied to working with teams, families, individuals. Well, it can also be used for businesses to kind of screw shit up. So I think we're erring on the good.
I appreciate about what you're doing here and what this is all about. And I mean, keep that charge up, because I think we gotta keep building awareness up. And I think we as a society need to know a little bit more about how the human mind works. And if we do that, I think we're going to have a chance to get out of these things better than when we went into them.
Dude, I agree, man. It's all we can do is continue to have these conversations, right?
Amen. Wouldn't want to do it with anybody else other than you. You know what I mean?
I appreciate my brother. So on that note, let's get the hell out of here, right? It's a long day, right? So everyone, I'm Michael Devine. You've been listening to Gray Matters Radio, only on the 614 Radio Network. This is Dr. Justin Anderson of Premier Sports Psychology. He's just a man. We came up with a lot of solutions. We know Phil Jackson should be president, and we know aliens. We get those two, everything is unscrewed. But in the interim, I think we got some good stuff, guys. Remember, common goal, shared upon common goal, mutual trust and respect for one another. Get out of our own ethnocentricity. Understand, learn about other people's cultures so we can understand those gaps. And just learning how to communicate. Be those figures where it's about that common goal and learn how to bring it back. It works in our families, works in our teams, works in organizations, and it will, dare I say it, work in our country. So on that note, everyone, you be good to each other. Remember, next time somebody asks you, hey, man, you a Democrat? You a Republican? You red? You blue? Just went, oh, man, fuck that noise. My ass is gray. All right, everybody, you be good to each other. We'll see you guys next week.